All right. Hey, this is B, and I'm here today with Johnny Barnett of Chakraology. Johnny is an astrologer, and I will let him do his own intro. So, welcome, Johnny.
Thanks, B. Well, hi, y'all. I'm an astrologer, and I've been studying astrology for about 30 years now. And what's unique about the way I practice my astrology um, is that about 11 years ago, I made the connection in my head between the seven original planets of astrology and the seven chakras. And so I call my work chakraology, the idea that as above, so below, or as without, so within. And that when I'm looking at your astrological chart, I'm seeing what's going on inside of you, or in other words, your chakras. So that's the short story about what I do.
So, tell us what chakras are. It's easy to assume that someone listening to this podcast or watching this video would know what chakras are, but just on the off chance that that is not the case, why don't you maybe offer us a brief description?
Sure. Well, I think first off, it's important to note that chakras are not from India. The word chakra is a Sanskrit word, of course, but chakras are universal, and we just never had a word for them in the West, and so we use the Indian word for it. But basically, it's the idea that there are seven main energy centers in your body, and you could say there's a physical correspondence, like the heart chakra, and there's actually a heart inside of your body, but they're really more like energetic centers. In other words, spirit, which, and I use the word spirit interchangeably with energetic in this context. Um, Spirit basically has seven main ways of operating in the physical world. And of course, it uses your body to do the action, to the operation. And so they're like seven main flavors. And of course, it comes through your heart, it comes through your throat, the way you communicate, it comes through your intuition, it comes through your sexuality, your physicality. There's all these different layers of physical expression of spiritual nature, if you will, or
Mhm.
spiritual foods. And that's the idea, is that we are both spirit and matter, and the seven chakras sort of show the seven main ways that
Right.
energy or spirit likes to
So
show up.
can we go through them? Like let's start with the root. Like maybe just a few words. Like there's the root chakra. It's located at the perineum. It's all about.
Well, it's all about survival in the physical. So again, we're spirit and matter combined, as long as we're in the body. So the root's about maintaining that connection to the planet, or being alive.
Mhm. And then
Uh-huh.
moving up, we come
The
to the.
sacrum, the sacrum, and it's also interesting because we have seven hand widths from the base of our spine to the top of our head. So if you're wondering where these are, you know,
My crown's right here at my mouth.
maybe try this
Maybe
at
I'm like
home.
maybe I'm like Donald Trump and I just have tiny little hands. Let me put them back here. Okay, go ahead.
No,
So
they're not seven, seven. Anyway, where were we?
we're the sacral chakra.
The sacral chakra. So creativity. Now, a woman has her womb or her uterus located at that same area, that same general area as the second chakra.
Mhm.
Um, but it's representative of creativity of all sorts. And so that's, and I might add the subtitle to creativity means fun. So things we do that we enjoy doing, and
Mhm.
for everything.
I love that. And then the sacral. No, I'm sorry, the solar plexus.
Plexus. Yeah. This is our physical center of gravity. So it shows sort of like energetically, where do we stand in the world? How do we identify ourselves? And this is who I am, and this is what I stand for. And the rest of matter in the material world has to revolve around where I am, you know.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Interesting. I like that. And then next one is
And of course, this is love, and we might talk a bit about love because, as it turns out, love is perhaps the most confusing word in the English language. Uh, I learned most of what I knew about love as a young person through television and radio and movies, and so I got a very narrow view of what love means. And so we might talk about what love really is about when we get onto the heart chakra some
oh, I
more.
would love to go back to that. And then we have the throat.
The throat chakra. Now, this is interesting because most people will just say it's about communication. As it turns out, speech is the end product of thought. So the fifth,
I can't hear you. Can you hear me? Oh boy.
was it the throat?
Yes, so I think Johnny accidentally muted himself while he was talking about thought and communication, which is hilarious.
Right, right. Okay. So back to the fifth chakra. So most people, most astrologers especially, will talk about Mercury and the throat or the throat chakra as being all about communication. And what they don't realize is that speech is the end product of thought. And so the fifth chakra is really about your mental activity being fed by the five physical senses, giving your mind something to think about, and then sharing what you've learned.
Hmm. Yeah, I love that. There's so much wisdom in that. And then moving up to and these chakras all have Sanskrit words for them, which we're not going to go over, but there
That's
are Sanskrit words for them as well.
I don't even know what they are. I
I
have a
only know this one, the ajna.
ajna, right? That's Visuddha, ajna, and the rest you're going to have to
Right.
look at. Um, so back to the brow chakra, we call it the third eye, and the idea is that the you have two physical eyes for perceiving the world of duality. You have one third eye for perceiving the world of unity and or energy, spirit. And so this is an intuitive center. This is figuring out and recognizing and understanding things that are not things that you can't touch, taste, see, smell, or hear, but they're still a part of our world. This is the center that receives that information rather than the physical eyes, the inner eye.
Hmm. Intuition and
Intuition,
the
absolutely.
sight. Okay. And so the seventh.
The crown. So this is also considered an intuitive center, but it works differently than this one because this is what we consider our connection to spirit.
Hmm.
And so this is if I'm a person, I have an ego, and I think that I'm here and you're there, for example, and my thoughts are here inside of my head. But once in a while, ideas pop into my head out of nowhere. That's the seventh chakra. This is wisdom and information that comes from somewhere we do not identify as ourself. It could be our higher self, if you like. It could be our angels. It could be the voice of God. If you are a religious person, you might want to phrase it in that way. But however you like to call it, this is our connection to all that realm that lies outside of our own awareness.
Hmm. I kind of sometimes think of the crown as universal love. Like at those times when, I don't know, like for me personally, when I want to, like I read something or I hear someone say something and I want to go into judgment and something comes in and just reminds me, like, you're not here to do that. You're here to love this person right where they are, right through whatever they're going through in every moment. Like, you're not here to judge that. You're here to see them in all of their glory right wherever they are in any moment.
Right. And so the crown chakra represents sort of that awareness that there is an entire world outside of ourself. There are other people, and they have their own game to play. They have their own mission to fulfill, their own way of being. And this is sort of the universal connector. It's like, oh, we're all from the same source, but we're in different physical manifestations, different bodies. And I don't know what it's like to be inside your body with your thoughts and having your mission and your understanding of the world. So yeah, that ability to refrain from judgment, we would assign that to this connection to
Mhm.
spirit or universality.
Awesome. Thank you. That was a really, really cool go through. So let's now talk about how all of, oh, sorry, turn that off. So let's go through like and talk about what you do now and how these chakras relate to the planets and how you
Yeah,
work with them.
yeah. Well, what like I said earlier, I recognize that the seven planets and the seven chakras are essentially the same thing. And so, for example, we'll go back to the heart, for example, and love. The heart is represented by the sun in your astrological chart. So the center of the chakra system, the center of the solar system, the core of who you are is represented by your sun sign in astrology. So basically, when I'm looking at your chart, I'm seeing your sun and like B, your sun may be in this sign, and my sun might be in that sign. So whatever sign your sun is in is going to give me some information about how your heart likes to operate or what your heart needs in order to
Mm,
be really at home and feel like it's doing its job. Like B,
love that.
tell us your sign, B, and I'll give this
Well,
information.
I know yours and mine because I'm pretty sure you're a Taurus sun. Is that right? And I'm a Cancer sun.
Okay. Yeah. So Cancer is very, very sensitive, and it's also cyclical like the moon. And so for B, for you to be like in a place where your heart's right, you have to be accessing your emotions and your feelings on a regular basis. And a lot of people like the hard crab shell, is a protection.
Mm,
And one thing cancers can do is get too hard of a shell, and then their heart starts to shrink, and
mm.
they're not being the person they were made to be.
So it
And
sounds
so
like the Grinch maybe was a Cancer.
I use the Grinch in my classes all the time. Three times too small or whatever. But
Right?
you could say this for any sun sign, uh, but for Cancer, it's tied in with the emotions and the feelings.
Yeah. So how about for Taurus? Tell us about Johnny.
Well, ooh, I usually like to keep this a secret, but Taurus is ruled by the planet Venus, which is a whole nother interesting story because people think of Taurus as a bull and being very masculine, but as it turns out, Taurus is the primary feminine sign ruled by Venus. And so and this is going to correspond with our second chakra, the planet Venus and the second chakra. So these are
Mm,
the things you love to do, the people you fall in love with in a romantic sense, the style of creativity that the activity you like to channel your creativity into. Are you an artist or are you a school teacher? Doesn't matter. You can be creative in either one of those endeavors.
mhm,
So Tauruses tend to focus their lives around their own creations. Willie Nelson is the example I give in my class of a Taurus who's built his whole world around his musical creations, right?
mhm,
Um, so yeah, that's what I'm looking at. But then the other interesting thing, I'm like, I would look at Venus in my chart to give me more information about what my sun needs. And B, in your case, I would look at the moon in your chart
mhm,
to show you what your sun needs because the moon rules Cancer.
mhm,
But then we also look at the chakra that corresponds with the moon. In your case, it's the brow chakra, So you have to really pay attention to your intuition. Like,
Yeah. I remember you telling me that, and I highly recommend this, all of you who hear this podcast or watch this video, get a reading with Johnny. I had one done not too long ago, and you told me something along the lines of, I'm a Cancer sun and moon in the fifth house. And you were like, everything is up here is just sort of blown wide open, and you have to be really aware of what's coming in. And you said you don't normally talk about like guarding or shielding, but that might be something I needed to think about because there's so much information coming at me.
right. So the moon in Cancer is even more profound than the sun in Cancer, because the moon rules Cancer, so
Hmm.
it's completely at home. So yeah, in your case, being a double Cancerian, yeah, you can't turn this brow chakra off. That's the thing. We can't turn any of these chakras off, even though we might think we can or we might want to. But even if you're not paying attention to your intuition, it's you're getting that information in, and if you
Yes.
don't deal with it somehow, it's going to eat you up.
Yeah. It's amazing just getting older and working with it and understanding that the intuitive hits are always real. Even my husband, who's very, very um, he's a shipyard facilities guy. He's pretty down to earth, hardworking, not into all of this spiritual stuff that I do. And he's like, "You've got to listen to your gut. It's always right." For, I mean, like within 6 months of us being together, he started saying that, and he still does. 20 some years later, it's
Yeah.
just a thing. So let's talk about some of the other signs and planets because nobody's listening to this to hear about me.
Okay. Well, it's interesting because people think like the ancient Greeks or Romans thought, and astrologers thought, that the sun and the moon and the planets all revolved around the earth.
Hmm.
That is not so. That is what the church told everyone, and that's a religious thing. But astrologers knew the order of the planets, and it's shown by the rulership of these planets with the signs. So we take Cancer and Leo, which are the two signs together at the summer of the year, and the sun rules Leo and the
Oh.
moon rules Cancer. And if you go one sign in either direction, you have Virgo and Gemini, and they're both ruled by Mercury, which is the first planet closest to the sun. And you go one more sign further in either direction, you get Libra and Taurus, ruled by Venus, which is the second planet furthest from the sun. You see a pattern here? So the Earth is next, and then after that we have Mars, which rules Scorpio and Aries. And then the next planet, Jupiter, rules Sagittarius and Pisces. And then the last planet furthest from the sun that you can see with your own eyes, Saturn, rules Capricorn and Aquarius.
Interesting. So the way I learned about this, the rulers of the signs are a little different. Um,
You're talking about Pluto and Scorpio and
yeah,
Uranus. Right.
yes, yeah. And if you use the asteroids, which some astrologers do, right, then you can go even farther and have some of the signs ruled by asteroids and not by planets.
Right.
So I'm curious about that, and this might be a little more of an advanced astrological question, but let's just go there.
Okay. Well, the thing that I do, and first off, we'll come back to asteroids in a minute, but for now, let's talk about Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, which in modern astrology are said to rule Aquarius, Pisces, and Scorpio in that order. And the thing is, um, the system I just described to you when I took the first, second, third
Hmm.
planet from the sun, um, you can see that's a very real, tangible system based on fact based on what we see in the world
Mhm.
around. We have the sun and the moon together, which are not planets, right?
Right.
And then the five planets go around like that in order. And just because you invented a telescope in the 18th century and found Uranus doesn't mean you can just plug it into this beautifully elegant system, because Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto represent different forces. And this is something most astrologers don't recognize because they're sort of bombarded with this modern astrological way of seeing things, as if Pluto, Uranus, and Neptune are the same as Mercury, Venus, Saturn, etc. Um, you have to look at them differently. First off, because you can't see them with your own eyes, so you need a telescope. So you have to look at them differently. But in the metaphor that is the world around us, the things you can see, the seven that you can see, would be embodied energies because you can see them with your physical eyes. The three that you cannot see would be outside of the body, either above or below.
Hmm. And there are, like, in the Indian tradition of chakras, or Hindu, is that correct?
Vedic
Um,
is the way they call it. Yeah.
Say it again.
Vedic.
Vedic, okay, tradition. There are chakras that are outside of the body, right?
I believe so.
Some below the feet, some up over the head, one's in your hands and your feet.
And Vedic astrology still only uses the seven planets that I just described.
Really?
Yeah, they don't even want to look at Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto.
Huh. Interesting.
But I look at them because they're there and they're very obviously showing an influence in our lives. And but it's a different way of looking. So basically, wherever one of those three outer planets connects with one of these seven, shows you where spirit is most readily accessible in your experience.
So you see the three planets that are not visible to the naked eye as representative of spirit.
Purely spiritual energies,
Okay,
whereas the
interesting.
seven are embodied spiritual forces.
I just learned so much every time I talk to you. Okay, so that's really cool. So, what's next?
Well, since you mentioned talking to me, we should point out that I actually do a class where
Yes,
I go
absolutely.
through seven chakras, and it's 2 hours long. And of course, I do it in person when I'm in your town, and I do it online anytime, anywhere. But yeah, that's the reason it's 2 hours. It's the class is really boils down to only 26 words. There's like 3 words for this chakra and 4 words for that one, and three or four. Uh, but it's basically 2 hours of context, like I just gave you about how
Mhm.
you can see the seven, but you can't see the three, and so you put three there. And I get into details like that for each of the seven chakras, and then of course tie them all together as a system, because you are a system of these seven.
Right. And is the class called Chakraology?
The class is called Chakras, Mythology, and Astrological Symbolism. And
So many long words.
that's the thing. The gods and goddesses have this of mythology have the same names as the planets. And so that's not an accident, you know. And every astrologer since I started studying 30 years ago, every astrologer I know and have read and talked to and learned from says that the different planets represent different components of our psyche, or different parts of our internal anatomy.
Mm-hmm.
We all say that. I'm just calling those parts of the internal anatomy chakras, which is what they have been called for thousands of years. So
Mm-hmm.
I don't know why other astrologers have not made the connection to chakras, but it's not only it's sort of like an obvious no-brainer, but it's also part of ancient tradition. If I can flash my book up there for a
Yes.
second, if you look really closely, you can see the planet symbols inside of the chakras.
Hmm.
This picture is about 400 years old. And not only that, it was drawn by a European about 400 years ago.
Hmm.
So somebody in Europe knew about chakras and knew about the connection of planets to chakras hundreds of years ago.
Oh yeah, people from Europe traveled to study with what was his name, Avicenna, in the Middle East 1,000 years ago, 2,000 years ago. So I can't, like, it might have been 2,000. It was a long time ago. People traveled all over the world. It took a long time to do it, but they did it
Mm-hmm.
way, way
Right.
before somebody drew that symbol. But of course, there was an information exchange between Asia and Europe and Northern Africa, even.
Right. Well, the interesting thing about the guy who drew this picture is he was an alchemist.
Mm,
And the thing people don't realize, and people throw the word alchemy around all the time in our current culture without really knowing what they're saying. But alchemy is an Arabic word that means, roughly translated, means Egypt. So alchemy is a medieval European preservation of ancient Egyptian wisdom. So they would not even had to go as far away as India to learn about chakras, because as I mentioned, the chakras are universal. And certainly we would expect the ancient Egyptians knew about them.
mm. I
Like,
hear you say that. My first reaction is to be suspicious as hell. And my second reaction is to think, yes, I've heard ancient Egypt called Kemet over and over again. That's where there are a lot of Black people who are into Kemetic science and who are Kemetic priests and priestesses and who still use that word. And their name for Isis is Alset because Isis is a Roman or Egyptian name for Alset.
right, beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah, it all really goes back to Egypt. And when you're talking about Western culture, it all goes back to Egypt. In fact, the Greeks, who most astrologers credit with, the foundation or the beginning of Western astrology, the Greeks themselves say we learned everything we know from Egypt.
Hmm.
So,
They
yeah,
were they predated everything.
yeah, everything else we know.
I mean,
And
just like our DNA, it all rose out of Africa, right?
could be, yeah. The other interesting thing, B, just because you mentioned, sort of, perhaps a tiny bit of skepticism, you may notice if you pick up your Bible after this that the first 7 of the 10 commandments in the Bible go just like that. They
Mm.
are the 7 chakras are represented by those first 7
So I say
commandments.
this is thou shalt have no other God before me.
Right. Or as I like to say, I'm God and you're not. Remember Chevy Chase from Saturday Night Live? The second one, and they're going down from the top rather than up from the root because it's
Coming
God
down.
down to Moses. The
Hmm.
second one is don't make a graven image. Don't draw a picture outside of you and point to it and say, look, that's God. You
Hmm.
use your eye to look inside of you to have your own experience of God.
Mm.
So yeah, it just goes on.
I'll have to check that out. That's
Yeah.
fascinating.
And of course, if the Bible were not proof enough, this pattern, these same chakras exist, of course, in the 7 books of Harry Potter.
I like that better. So,
Well, it's like every work of literature between the Bible and Harry Potter, and everything in between follows this pattern. Shakespeare, Gone with the Wind, Star Wars, every great novel, every great story has these same archetypal imagery
Mhm.
in it. It's a part of our Western culture.
Mhm. I think it's just do you think it's just Western culture or part of the human experience?
Well, I know that in India they have different gods and goddesses that have somewhat different personalities. So I think it's our Western telling of an archetypal human experience.
Mhm.
Whereas in India, they have an Indian version of that same energetic, but with slightly different characters and modes of expression.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Do you think they follow the same archetypal pattern though?
Oh yeah, that's what I'm saying. That
Okay.
the Western version of the same archetypal pattern, the
Okay,
Indian
gotcha.
version of that same
So
archetypal
they're
pattern.
different stories, but it's the same,
The
hitting on
the
the
gist,
same points.
the gist is the same. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, so fascinating. So maybe we could go through the planets and you could tell us which planet corresponds to each chakra. And I don't want you to teach your whole 2 hour class here. We've got about 20, 25 minutes left. So, or if there's something else that you want to talk about, that's cool too.
Well, how about we go through a couple of planets?
Okay.
Because if I gave them all away, the not it's
Right.
not just about I want you to come pay me to see my class, but the thing is, the context is so important for you to digest this properly. Because I can just go, oh yeah, blah 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 blah, and you're like, okay, cool, I got it, bye. But if
Right.
you're sitting down hearing the stories and I'm relating it to your own experiences, then you really grok it, you
And the
know?
class is so good. Like we did this class online. Johnny taught it for me and some friends, and it's really so amazing. I would love to do it in person now that it seems like we're getting back to being able to do those sort of things. Um, I'm thinking about something we could play with, which would be like famous people or you know what I mean? Anything. Instead of going through your chakrology stuff, we could go through just like some scenarios. What do you think? Which would you rather do?
Um, either. I'm not sure what you're hinting at there with famous people,
Well,
but
we
I
could
mean,
just,
I do use like the Beatles, for example. I use the Beatles as examples in my class.
I'm just
Um,
thinking about chart points. Like, yeah, that's probably too difficult because we would have to pull them up on the internet.
well,
But
well, how about this? Let's talk about the second chakra and romantic love versus the heart chakra and this big love. And I'll use John Lennon as an example, talking about stuff in his chart. Does that fit your?
yes, that sounds great. And I think that's really cool. I mean, we did the moon, it just had its little brush up against Venus, right?
Mhm.
Like night before last.
I can't remember. It was cloudy here.
Yeah, so we had this little brush of the goddess of love with Luna. So I think that love might be a beautiful thing to talk
Wonderful.
about.
Well, yeah, and like I said earlier, love perhaps is the most confusing word in the English language, because you're told that Venus is the goddess of romantic love, um, but you don't love your husband or wife in the exact same way you love your dog or your parents or your children or your friends. They all share a commonality, of course. It's a feeling, but you express that in very, very different ways. And so Venus is representative of romantic love, that kind that you feel for a very, very tiny percentage of the population. Whereas this heart love is like the idea is that you can feel love for everybody that you run into, everybody you meet, and even people you don't meet. So the Venus is much more personal and intimate, and of course sexual, whereas the heart is asexual. You just don't have time to sleep with everybody on the planet. nor do you have the inclination. You know, your Venusian sense of creativity and fun is very narrow, and it's focused on not only a few activities that you like to do, but on a few people that you fall in love with.
No, I'm sort of like, this is one of my weird things, but I'm like sitting here with this image of these priestesses in the temples, the sexual healing priestesses in old times, really like channeling this radiant universal love for people, but bringing every single one of them in as if that individual were the divine beloved, over and over and over again, seeing each one as the god, each one as the beloved. Rumi and Kabir and all of those old um, Sufi poets writing about the beloved.
Mm-hmm.
They weren't writing about their lovers; they were writing about the divine. And so I see this as these priestesses doing both, right? They're bringing this sun energy and turning each person into the Venus energy through the this. I don't know.
Right.
I don't know
Yeah.
if I'm wording this well, but I think you understand what I'm
Yeah.
saying.
And I would say that's a combination of the heart with the sacrum or with the sun and Venus. And I think that might be the goal. Um, However, we are going to select one, maybe two or three or four people, eventually to marry, to
Mm-hmm.
cohabitate with, to dedicate our time and our space and our energy to as a life choice. And those are the people, hopefully, that you're feeling a romantic connection to, at least at first. And that's sort of the interesting part because Venus is the hook that gets you in that relationship. It doesn't keep you there at all.
Mm-hmm.
Venus in the mythology is sleeping around. She's
Oh
jumping from
yeah.
one bed to another because she's addicted to love or addicted to that euphoria you feel when you first meet someone. You fall in
Mm-hmm.
love and you want to be joined at the hip and
It's
never
like
separate.
Queen Maeve of Connaught. She
Right,
had she had a beautiful husband who she loved and had a great relationship, but she also would have as many as 30 lovers in a day because she needed that in order to be satisfied, but her husband was fine with it.
right. Takes all kinds. You
Right.
never
So
know.
she was definitely in the arms of Venus.
Right, right. But she and her husband, and just as you and your husband and any married couple that stays together for very long, is going to have some strong connection in their heart chakras.
Hmm.
So Venus all by itself will not last. It's not
Hmm.
supposed to last. In fact, Venus, you look up in the sky, it's the morning star right now. This time next year, it's going to be the evening star.
Hmm.
Always changing her mind, and which is fine. That's how your creativity also runs in spurts. Creativity is not just a straight line. It's like boom, oh, I had an idea, boom, and then it's like I need to recharge that creative battery, and then boom, I got another inspiration. So you know,
Hmm.
you talk about John Lennon now, who was a Libra ruled by Venus, and he and the Beatles were, especially with him and Paul McCartney, it was a team, it was a collaboration of two guys working together to make music. And at some point, John Lennon fell out of love with the Beatles and Paul McCartney about the same time he found Yoko. So he basically jumped out of Paul's bed into Yoko's bed, right? Now, you may say that Yoko is not nearly as talented as a musician as Paul McCartney, because no one else is. Uh, but what was important to John was that he had a new source of energy to play with, to create with, like he'd sort of run his course with the Beatles. And nothing new or exciting was happening for him, but Yoko activated a whole new set of circuitry, if you will. And that's Venus. That's why Venus just jumps from here to there because it's like, wow, I get some more juice over here. And so just like your queen, what's her name?
Maeve.
Yeah, she's getting her new circuitry fired up by all the different lovers that maybe she was a Taurus. I wouldn't be surprised if she was.
I wouldn't either. That is sort of the sign of the courtesan.
Right. Yeah. So yeah, we differentiate in the class. You know, we use Venus and other characters from culture as representative of that Venusian energy. And then we get up to the heart chakra, we talk about Jesus and being and whether you're religious or not, there's a story or a mythology in the Bible being told. And the Jesus mythology is love everyone,
Mm-hmm.
love your neighbor, love your enemy. And that's he's not talking about go to bed with them or marry them. He's talking about feel compassion, feel empathy, feel respect and kindness and for everyone you meet.
Mm-hmm. I
Yeah.
think even most people who are really done with Christianity and have had more than their fill of toxic Christianity are pretty okay with Jesus. It's just what people have done with his teachings that seem to be the real problem.
I would
He's
agree.
a Jew, not a Christian anyway.
Jesus was a Jew. Uh,
Okay, so Paul McCartney so he jumped out of bed with Paul McCartney, John Lennon did, and jumped into bed with Yoko Ono. Where does the this divine love come in for him?
right. That's a good question. Well, as a Libra, so Venus is his most important planet, you would say,
Mhm.
for his heart. And so he's got to be creating all the time. And so what he found was that, like I said, his creative juices were reignited with Yoko. And so he's back into being, you know, who he's supposed to be, if you will. And so, you know, he also created a child with Yoko and he dedicated his life for 5 years. He stayed home raising the baby. So you know, Venusian people, their creations are perhaps more important to them than the average person. Not
Mhm.
every guy is going to stay at home and raise the baby, but he felt a really strong connection. Even I can speak to that myself as a Taurus. I felt as if my own child was you know I was not what's the word? There's some parents that are like
Helicopter.
helicopter parents stay around all the time, and some parents that are never there. You know, I was more towards the helicopter than toward the absent. You know, because it's like, wow, this is my child, my creation. You know, it's a part. It is a direct expression of my heart. This is a piece of my heart exists in that child. You know, so there's a strong sense of connection there with your creations.
That's beautiful. I love hearing that from a man because we're taught, and something you just said, like most guys aren't going to stay home, but that's only something we're taught. That's not something that's actually real. You know, like men are just as capable of staying home with children as women are. They're not as able to breastfeed, but once that part's over with, you know, and in these days that doesn't even really matter. Um, yeah, that's so cool.
Yeah. Now,
Okay, so
other people with other signs, like if you're ruled by Mars, you're going to feel that same intense connection with your physical activity that a Taurus or Libra will feel with their creations. And if you're a Gemini or a Virgo ruled by Mercury, the throat chakra, you're going to feel that same intense connection to your intellect, to your ideas, and the ability to share them. So everyone is going to
interesting.
operate so very differently, of course, because we're all different and have different energies to bring.
I'm going to talk about me again, but well, not really
Okay.
me. About my child though. I do have a lot of cancer. My youngest daughter is in college getting a degree in journalism, and she is a Virgo. And I've always looked at Virgo as being ruled by Venus. And looking at Virgo as being ruled by Mercury instead is like kind of mind blowing for me. She is such a writer. She's always been a writer. She's won like huge awards in poetry and journalism in high school. We just found out today she won a Georgia College Press first place for an article that she wrote. Like, she's such a writer. And thinking about Virgo being ruled by Mercury is kind of like, what? That it makes such, for her in particular, like bringing the macrocosm down into my tiny little microcosm of my personal life is like, wow,
Right. Right.
wow.
But you can see that that intellect is just going nonstop for her,
Yes.
and she identifies through that intellect to a large degree. Now
Hmm.
she can have Venus in her chart also, and it might also be in a significant place, but at her core, and corazon is how we say heart in Spanish. At her core, um, it's exercising that intellectual muscle is so very important.
I think her Venus is in Sag.
Well, not not possible, but we'll talk about that later. Yeah, Venus never goes more than 2 signs away from the sign the sun is in.
Interesting.
Yeah, because it's between us and the sun. So from our point of view, it's always
I
right
have
there.
to look now. I'm sorry. I just,
Yeah, it can't go very far from our point of view.
it might just also be in Virgo, but I'm sure I have her chart sitting right here. No, it's her Mars that's in Sag. It's in Leo.
Venus and Leo.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Okay. How about that? I didn't know that either. That's so interesting. That Venus is always within two signs of
Two
the
at the,
sun.
two at the most, and Mercury is always within 1 sign at the most because it's even closer to the sun from our point of view.
Fascinating. Fascinating. Yeah. I mean, I guess I have just, enough astrological knowledge to be dangerous.
As do many.
But like the practical things like that, like looking at the sky and saying, oh, well, that actually can't happen because the sky won't let it. It's funny. I had a talk with a homeschool mom yesterday, and she's like, I'm trying to teach my 2-year-old how to write 21 and explain to her what that number is. And I was like, sit down and have her count 21 things. Like, give her 21 peanuts or 21 rocks or
Hmm.
21 Fruit Loops or whatever. Because at 5 years old, she needs it to be form.
Hmm.
She needs it to be here in her hand, not this mental concept. And
Well, depending on the child, of course.
depending on the child, but also in general, children need to do things with their bodies more than they do with their minds. But with astrology, that's also important too, right? Like, it's actual stuff that's going on in the sky.
Yeah,
It's not just all this mental stuff. It's not just symbols on a piece of paper. It's really,
right. People used to know what sign the moon was in just by looking up at the sky and seeing what the moon looked like. So, for example, at the full moon, the moon is always in the sign opposite the sun. That's why it's full, because they're on opposite sides of the sky.
right. And the sun's shining directly on it and illuminating it. And
So
then
if
at
you
the
ever,
new moon or the dark moon,
it's in
the
the same
moon's
sign,
conjunct.
right?
Yeah.
And if it's the quarter moon where you see half, straight line and then the half of the round, that's going to be 3 signs away from the sun
Mhm.
every time. If it's the quarter from that side, it's going to be 3 signs over here. If it's a quarter from that side of the old moon, it's going to be 3 signs the other direction. But yeah, you can, and people did this all the time
Mhm.
before we stopped caring about the sky and started looking at clocks, but
And
that's how you knew about seasons. That's how you knew about planting. That's how you knew when the right time to start things and the right time to wind things down was. You paid attention to the moon and with your
yeah,
own eye.
yeah. And before, like, we lost sight of what's going on out there. We have so much light pollution now, it's hard to see the sky in a lot of places. You know, I live in Chesapeake, Virginia, very close to Norfolk, Virginia Beach, Hampton, Newport News, Portsmouth. Like, we have the world's largest concentration of military bases here. And it's huge. And the light pollution is ridiculous. You can go out and, I mean, you can see the moon, but there aren't many stars showing in the sky. And then we go to our little farm out in western North Carolina in deep Appalachia, where there's very little light pollution. There is still some, but there's very little. And oh my gosh, just the sky is just stunning. You know, we can lay out on a blanket in the yard and just
Yeah,
it's amazing. But yeah, we've lost touch with what's going on out there living in our boxes.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. All right. So tell me, um, do you have anything coming up? How does somebody get a reading with you? How do they get a hold of Johnny Barnett if they're interested in getting some more?
Yeah. Well, there are a couple ways. I'm on Facebook, um, you know, Facebook/Chakraology. I'm also, and you can message me there. Although it's probably easier if you do my personal Johnny Barnett Facebook page. But there's also my email, info@chakraology.org is a great way to reach me. Um, I have a website. You can go there, and I think my email address is um, posted there, and you can sign up for a reading there. But it's really sooner or later we're going to wind up texting each other to set the schedule. I don't do that online scheduling thing, so we'll pick a time and date. So really, the if you want to cut to the chase, you can just email me right away.
Yeah,
But
and you're really good about responding to messages, texts, emails, even Facebook messages. And you're not a super active Facebook guy, but you do get back with messages really quickly.
yeah,
So, yeah, you're super good at that. Can we talk finally, at the final moment here, about what we're doing together?
sure. So last year, I sort of was in having one of those little personal crises, one of those existential crises, or long dark night of the soul, and something I kept running into in life over the years. I'd run into again. It's like, I'm not happy about this. What can I do about this? So as an astrologer, I turned to astrology to find the whys and the wherefores for what I'm experiencing, and realized that these two planets, in my chart were sort of at odds with each other.
Mm.
And I remembered reading one of my favorite astrological books called Making the Gods Work for You by Caroline Casey. She mentions that ritual is how you get the gods' attention. And it dawned on me, aha, if I want to make a change, if I need some transformation in my life in a particular area, I can identify the characters who are responsible for this disharmony in my chart, and I can perform a ritual where those two characters get on the same page. And I did so, and I timed it so basically when the two planets up in the sky were lined up in just the best way possible. And I will mention sacred geometry is the way I calculate these times. Uh, and I don't know if any other astrologer does this, but that's sort of like the secret sauce, is using the sacred geometry to set your timing, because space and time matter. There are good times for beginning and good times for ending, etc.
Mm.
So I did this ritual, and it completely transformed my life, gave me a whole new perspective and way of being. in this particular area. And I've decided to offer this as a service. So I'm teaming up with priestesses such as B and others, shamans, other people that I call ritual guides, who are really adept and experienced at leading people through ritual. And so we team up, and I sort of do the intake interview and find out what's going on with the client and look at their chart to see what planets are involved. I sort of set the tone for the disharmony or for the disconnect or what's happening in life. And then I pass it over to B, and she starts working with the client to design a ritual where we can get these two forces together onto the same page. And B, you tell them what you do, B. I mean, you tell them whether you can recommend maybe a fire ceremony, or maybe just lighting a candle, or meditating, or praying, or chanting, or drumming, or what, all the different elements that a priestess such as yourself would bring in.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. What Johnny's saying. You would just get in touch with me and I can come to you in person and do ceremony with you in person, or we can set up something online that you can do privately. And I will totally cater it to your needs, bringing in that heart energy of divine love, like Johnny was talking about. That Leo. Yeah, I have a Mercury in Leo, so I feel like this is particularly potent for this kind of thing.
Right, right. Leo rules the heart, or is ruled by the sun, the heart.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, great.
Awesome.
Yeah, it's a wonderful way to really get the forces of the universe on your side. That's
Mm-hmm.
the idea. It's like you can decide you want to change your life any moment in time. It's like, oh, I want to do something right now. But there are sometimes when the universal forces or the planets themselves are lined up just so to really give you that boost. There are other times when those planets are lined up to oppose you,
Mm-hmm.
to contradict you. And so you want to time things so that you have the greatest chance for success. And that's where the astrology comes in.
Awesome. I love it. I love it. Um, Hang out for a second after we end the recording, if you would. But I want to just thank you for being here. Thank you for doing this interview. This has been fun and super cool and informative. And I know people are just going to love it and love you. So thank you, Johnny.
Thank you, B.
All right. So I will have all the pertinent info in the show notes. So if you want to find Johnny, just um, look at my website, www.bepriestess.love, and you can find the videos and podcasts link on the bar.